What is happening, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Austin, and welcome to the One Last Hit podcast. And I have a very special episode for you today. We are sitting down with Mr. Jordan M. Jordan, what's going on, you beautiful bastard? What are you up to, man?
Oh, shucks. What's up, Daddy-O?
So Jordan and I, we have sobriety dates that are relatively close to one another. And what's nice about that, you know, is I think I met Jordan when I had like a month sober or something. I think it was at that meeting at the little church there in Winter Park. But man, he and I have just been kind of on this journey together for the last couple and some change years. And so I'm very but one thing I don't know about Jordan is I've heard bits and pieces of your story, man, but I have not really dove into it. And I'm just stoked for it, man. So if you're ready, I'm ready, bro. Let's get after it.
Let's go.
Cool. So where do we begin? Tell me, where were you born?
Born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Okay. And did you spend like most of your childhood there or what was it?
My family relocated to the Daytona beach area when I was a baby, and we lived a block from the ocean for my formative years. 18 years of my life.
Okay.
Was in Daytona.
All right. So what was your early life like? Were mom and dad married?
They were at first. They divorced when I was about 4, and dad moved about an hour south of Daytona to Titusville. He had a work opportunity that took him down to Titusville. So we saw dad, on weekends, usually every other, but, dad coached my Little League team. He was involved in my Boy Scout troop. So we got to see dad a decent amount, but for all intents and purposes, raised by single mom. Childhood was relatively normal, with the exception of the divorce, and shared parenthood or shared homes, shared custody rather. Living in Daytona is pretty boring. We get the beach is great for a while, but you kind of get burnt out on that. Or at least I got burnt out on the beach. Tourist season is fun. People coming into town for any number of events that Daytona still hosts. But for other 46 weeks out of the year, it's a pretty sleepy little quiet beach town. But yeah, like I said, normal childhood, man. I played baseball, did Boy Scouts, took piano lessons. Mom did a great job raising us, and dad was as present as he could be, and for all intents and purposes, I don't know that there was anything realistically contributing to my needing to experiment with chemicals as a direct result of anything that happened in childhood. Yeah, all intents and purposes, it was pretty normal. I don't know. I mean, I did well in school. Yeah, I mean, I had one isolated incident from childhood that was unfortunate. I had a family trip up to Northern California where my mom's side of the family was, and an older cousin of mine was going through puberty, and I was still a little too young to really know what that was all about. And he took advantage of his curiosity with me and persuaded me to have to do some of the stuff that pubescent boys do a little earlier than I probably should have been exposed to that kind of stuff. Again, unfortunate. It wasn't violent or anything like that, but it was definitely manipulative and coercive. And I got to deal with that later in life. Got to unpack that through the process of dealing with that. But outside of that, really, like for all intents, it was pretty normal, uneventful for the most part until high school. Things got wild in high school. So
well, I'm curious.
It was good.
Sorry to cut you off there. Somebody in Michigan is really pissed at you for calling living by the beach boring. But B, I'm curious, when you did unpack that later in life, like what did that look like? Like what kind of conclusions on how that might have affected you did you come to?
So yeah, I think the most revealing truth about that, as far as how it may have affected me, over the years, mainly just a general subconscious distrust of men, skepticism to be honest or vulnerable around other men, that may have been reinforced by just the general relationship between my father and I. Dad came from a military family. Grandpa was a Vietnam Marine Corps vet, and so he was definitely emotionally closed off. My father, I think I remember seeing him cry twice in my entire life. The one time for sure was at my grandfather's funeral. So Dad was pretty emotionally reserved. So I think that reinforced that that underlying belief that came as a result of, call it the molestation, if you will, that men can't be trusted, which probably reared its way, manifested in my womanizing kind of experiences throughout, throughout my drinking and the chemical use, and even, early attempts at sobriety too, just seeking comfort from women, because men can't be trusted. But yeah, the situation from childhood was suppressed until I actually was in treatment, for the first and to date only time that I went to treatment. But I was 18 or 19 years old, and the scenario came back as if it had happened the day prior, and it was full sensory awareness of what had happened, to the point to where it was undeniable that situation had played out from my childhood. And I made sure to check in with my mother and confirm that family trip actually happened. And she's like, yeah, we were there around that time, and there was definitely a period of time during that trip where you guys wandered off to go, I don't know if it was some farmland, blueberry field or something like that. It was like, I think that's when it went down. She's like, yeah, makes sense. And but I guess it was fortunate that it came up in the environment that it did, because I got to talk to therapists right away. And then it came up later in inventory work. Obviously had a pretty big resentment against my cousin. But I do also feel that I was fortunate I got to see that his lifestyle wasn't exactly putting a whole lot of gold stars in his corner. So, approaching it from, he probably was on the receiving end of some less than ideal behavior, probably worse than what he did with me. So, I managed to get to a place of compassion and forgiveness for him. But, I think it definitely kept me from wanting to be vulnerable with guys, peers, even probably more peers than older men, because I had a good relationship with my father, and my cousin was not too much older than me, but probably affected my relationships with men of my own age or similar age for most of my life up until recently. So,
no, that makes a lot of sense. And so, at what age were you when you first caught a buzz with whatever substance that was on?
I guess 13 or 14. 13 or 14. Yeah. Alcohol was first, and I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Tell me about it.
A buddy of mine who we were playing music a fair amount, I think originally through the church that we were going to, but we were at his mom's house, and mom wasn't home. I don't remember whose idea it was, but the idea presented, he knew of the liquor cabinet, and so we mixed up, we got some Cokes from the pantry, right? They weren't cold, which was not the wisest choice to have our first cocktail experience, but we knew that rum and Coke was a thing. So, the Coke was in the pantry, so we poured out some of the Coke from the cans, fill it back up with lukewarm rum, and had ourselves a few rum and Cokes. And I mean, talk about, I know I've heard you say, it's like the brief glimpse of quiet that you get when driving through a rainstorm and you drive under an overpass. I love that. I always describe it as feeling as if a headache I didn't even know that I had was gone. It's I felt like I was funny, I was popular, I was attractive, all these other issues I had with myself that I didn't even know that I had were solved in that moment, and everything was funny. And the outlook on life was brighter than it ever was, and I can't wait to do this again and as often as I can afford to get away with. And it was all off of lukewarm rum and coke at a buddy of mine's house, who interestingly enough is sober now.
Okay.
The writing was on the wall for both of us at that young age. But yeah, alcohol was the first. Cannabis wasn't too far beyond that, and it was another similar kind of like, oh yeah, this is great. Everything was funny. Didn't really care what other people. I mean, there was a little bit of paranoia mixed in because of the environment that the first experience with cannabis was, but otherwise it was like, yeah, we're gonna do this as often as possible for sure. Right,
man. Unbelievable. I remember being 14, and I had started smoking weed, and I had watched Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke, stoned at a friend's house, but I couldn't pronounce Cheech and Chong. So I came home all stoned, and my mom says, "What were you doing?" I said, "Watching a movie." She said, "What movie?" And I said, "Ching Chong Chang." And she knew exactly what I was talking about, man. And from that moment, she's like, "Oh, this kid's going down a bad road, man." So humble beginnings, right? A little rum and coke, a little weed. Where does it go? And this is in middle school, right, for you?
Yeah, like middle school for sure. The transition into high school, I managed to straighten out for the better part of a year in high school. This cute cheerleader who was a year older than me caught my attention, and she was all about going to church, and so I followed in those footsteps there for a brief period, but then it wasn't long after that I went back to my first true love, and it was probably led to the demise of that relationship. And drinking became far more frequent. Cannabis use far more frequent throughout high school. I barely got through high school by the skin of my teeth, but I'd already learned the rewards that came from meeting goals and accomplishing things. So I didn't fall too far behind academically, but I did just the bare minimum to get through what I needed to get through school. And my senior year was probably when things started to look like, okay, this is going to become a little more repetitive and habitual than I may have originally intended it to be. But we can have some fun with this. I remember I was able to buy beer from a couple of the gas stations in Daytona Beach, at 16, 17 years old. So I remember I supplied drinks for high school parties. We would go drinking in the woods. And that probably when I experienced my first blackout, which I'm sure was scary, but didn't slow me down or stop me. I'm pretty sure I got cut off at a high school keg party at one point, which I don't think that is supposed to happen. But they were like, "Hey man, you paid $5 for that cup, and you've had far more than your fair share of $5 worth of this keg of Natty Light or whatever the hell we were drinking back." But yeah, there was definitely the early signs of rearranging what I thought the trajectory of my life should look like to accommodate the lifestyle. Definitely began to show its symptoms as I began to get closer to finishing high school. And then cocaine was introduced, and the bottom kind of fell out there pretty quick.
Now we're talking. Yeah. So you barely graduate high school. What happens at that point?
I'd been accepted to Florida State and had even gotten so far into that process as to have gotten a roommate assigned. And originally was thinking I was going to go to Tallahassee and go to college. But recognizing that was a big party school, and with cocaine in the equation now, and my drinking habits taking me to certain parts of town that I didn't think I'd ever go to, and associating with people that I otherwise wouldn't be interested in spending time with. I gave sobriety a shot right out of high school. I think my first attempt to quit entirely was shortly after graduating high school, and I opted to stay in town and go to community college instead of go off to college. But I think the writing was on the wall. I feel a certain amount of gratitude that it runs in my family, this thing, and so I was given warnings that I might have it because of genetics. So after a series of unfortunate outcomes as a result of drinking and using, I kind of gave a little bit of credit where credit was due, and that I might be what my parents had told me that I probably was going to be, alcoholic, drug addict, the whole nine. So I gave their solution a shot. Started going, went to a few meetings, tried to see what that was all about. Ultimately found that it wasn't for me at the time, and ran the experiment again. But it got pretty bad pretty quick. And my first semester at community college was wildly unimpressive. The transcript from that first semester is not anything worth being proud of. And ironically enough, I declared a criminal justice major because it took this one, I don't even remember the premise of this college course, but it's a single credit course designed to help kids create a framework for their education. And it's, they put you through these big surveys and ask you a bunch of questions. What are you good at? What do you like? What's important to you? And at the end of it, they spit out a short list of careers that you should consider and the subsequent academic paths to get there. And law enforcement was on the list. And I was like, all right, cool. Why not? I had seen Training Day with Denzel, and I was like, I get down with that one for sure. I was like, that might work. Let's see how this might play out. And I remember I had a class that was like Intro to Corrections at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I went to that class a few times on no sleep, and was like, this seems problematic. That learning about the correction system by a former corrections officer, and I can't seem to talk without making my mouth move, and I'm really tired, but I also can't seem to not stop blinking. So I voluntarily went to treatment after one semester of high school, and that's how I ended up in Orlando. I have a younger sister. She was already in treatment at that time because she was into some big girl drugs, and so she found herself in treatment at 16 or 15 years old, maybe 14, somewhere around there. So I was making trips over with the family to go see her, and then going back home and going and partying, and like man, this doesn't quite add up. So I was like, maybe I'll give treatment a shot, and then ended up in treatment, which was probably saved my life, or at least gave me a real good separation from chemicals for a period.
Sure.
The treatment center was wacky. They're not around anymore, but it was a wacky treatment center. Not at all. I mean, just bastardized anything that looks like 12-step recovery. It was not an appropriate introduction to, what I've come to learn as being appropriate and effective ways to treat alcoholism addiction. But served its purpose. That's where I came to remember the incident from childhood. Got my first opportunities to address that therapeutically. And I stayed clean for a few years after that. So, it served. Yeah. I was at one point, I was in the Never Had a Legal Drink Club.
Yeah. Was this in a 12-step fellowship? Were you in a 12-step fellowship? Okay.
I was hanging out, I wasn't really participating, but I was
getting
hanging out. I mean, I was a teenager, I was 19, 20, 21 years old. There weren't many other kids my age at the time, doing that stuff, or at least from what I could see, there was one young person's meeting, and it met one night a week, and they weren't that young people that went to it. So
I'm curious what your experience was at that young. I got sober originally at 22, so I at least have some of that experience. But I'm curious what yours was at such a young age.
I mean, the fellowship that I did find was valuable. I mean, it was a viable distraction from the previous lifestyle. I mean, I remember we would go to Denny's after the late night meetings and hang out at Denny's until 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And at one point we were like thinking it'd be cool to take shots of maple syrup, so like it wasn't quite sober behavior, I mean, it wasn't drinking, but like it was like, we're flirting with the devil for sure. But some of the relationships that I made back then, I still have today, loosely kind of in touch with, still kind of like to check in on each other from time to time. But it was tough to identify, I mean, I'd had collectively a few months of bad experiences with drugs and alcohol. And in comparison to people that had decades, anytime somebody said I spilled more than you drank, I was like, you're probably right. Yeah. I don't know that I got my money's worth on this thing yet, but I very well might have what everybody else here has. But I wasn't convinced, I absolutely wasn't convinced. But it gave me a good taste, it gave me a real good taste, and I knew where to go when things got worse later, which they, inevitably did. So
what was your relapse like around that? How long did you get? 3 years? Was it 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years. 3 years, based on my best recollection. I met my son's mom. So the meeting that I frequented most often was in a strip mall, and a few doors down from the strip mall was a pizzeria that a lot of people from the meeting would hang out at before and after, and sometimes during the meetings. And the pizzeria hired, they had cute waitresses across the board. That's like a standard for working there. And I caught the affection and attention of one of them, and we started hanging out. We tried to play house, which ultimately was unsuccessful. But, shortly after, our third attempt of being together, she got pregnant, we got married, moved in together, tried doing the whole, and I had her convinced that I probably wasn't a real alcoholic or drug addict. That was probably just a phase from teenage years. We started to go through our own difficulties with our relationship, and we're seeing a professional, and I had the professional convinced that I probably wasn't a real alcoholic or real drug addict. So everybody co-signed running the experiment again, so it was the summer of, that probably was 2009, 2010, something like that. 4th of July. I remember we all went out with a bunch of her friends that drank normally, and a couple of friends that I had made from going to meetings, but mostly her friends. And the plan was that I was going to drink with everybody on 4th of July, and I did. And I picked up right where I left off. And I've got a buddy of mine from recovery that was there that night, and he was like, "Yeah, it was awful watching you do that, knowing that what was likely to come from it." And I was off to the races. She and I drank together. She would drink, we would drink together, but then she would call it quits around midnight, because we had a baby to take care of the next day. So she's like, "I'm going to get to bed and be up with the baby." And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to have people over to the house and like have a party." I was like, "You got the baby." It was bad. I mean, there were one or two people that would hang with me, and drink as long as we could drink. But, I was working in restaurants. I had graduated college. I managed to finish college. I was all said, through that period of sobriety. I was still working at the restaurant and hospitality, and I had gotten a promotion. I was going to become the youngest manager that the company had ever seen. And so my last night at the restaurant that I had opened and built up with the regular staff, being that I was transitioning into management, I got to hang with the managers for the first time. Right. So like we had a couple of drinks and we went and smoked a little weed after work. And I came home to my son's mom, who was also my wife at the time, and she could tell that I was stoned. She's like, "That's it. We're done. Pack your stuff and get on out of here." She's hardline about smoking weed. Right. To this day, I think she's tried it once or twice and wasn't a fan.
Wow.
Thankfully, she's not one of us.
Wow. So she would drink with you, but anything beyond drinking was a no-no.
Hard no, hard pass.
Incredible.
Yep.
So all right, you built this restaurant, you move into management, you started drinking again, a little bit of weed, relationship ends without reconciliation. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. The professional ended up telling us that we were better off figuring out how to co-parent from different addresses, which was great advice, and that worked out well for us in the long term.
Okay. So what happens? Do you go on a run at this point, or what does this look like?
Yeah.
You try some controlled drinking?
So, several years. I mean, I don't know that there were, I guess you could try controlled drinking. I don't know that I was trying to control it. I'd never drank in bars before, so like I had all these bars in Orlando. The greater Orlando area was my playground, so I got my money's worth on that relapse. That run lasted for years. My newborn son or toddler son didn't need much from me at the time. So I was pretty free to kind of do what I wanted, free from the relationship, free from all responsibility surrounding being a father. And over time, I remember I found that going across town to drink was not safe because I would black out and figure out a way to get home in a blackout, which usually meant I'm driving. And that started to get a little scary. So I kept it to a pretty tight radius. And that meant, the few places that were within a couple miles of where I lived. And then that got old. So I was like, well, we're going to go back out to other parts of town again. I remember a couple of blackouts, a couple of times where I managed to get out of DUIs where, somehow managed to pass field sobriety tests, convinced the cops to let me get a ride home, totaled a vehicle, and got away scot-free. I mean, I got away with a few things that I recognized that I was, my chances were running out, to get away with what I was getting away with. And so I went back to where I knew to go, went back to the same place that I went that was only a few doors down from the pizzeria. And a lot of people there were still there and they were happy to see me back. And I dug in, I dug in like I had never dug in before.
How old were you at this point?
26.
26. Okay. So you go back to the meeting you were rolling with prior. People are still there. And what was different about it then than before?
I think the true nature of my disease was I accepted it for what it really was, right? And it looked like life or death. It looked like that if I continue on doing what I'm doing, things are going to get real bad real quick. And so I was willing to do what they suggested and not just hang out, And so I did, and I did that. I did what they suggested, as far as all the suggestions. I went and picked back up with the same guy that I trusted before, but we never really did much. And we kind of went through the motions again, and it was a pretty lackadaisical approach to 12-step action and recovery type stuff, but still, felt like I owed it to pick up where I left off, and then went and got a second sponsor, and kind of, and took a new approach to it. And every time we got to that place where I'm supposed to be the one reaching out to help somebody else, I'm like, I don't know that I'm quite ready yet. So I went and got a third sponsor, probably within a year, maybe a year and a half. And that sponsor, I think, I led with this, seeming inability, unwillingness, or unqualification, not qualified approach to helping somebody else. Cause I'm still, feeling like I'm pretty young and got some more drinking experience under my belt for sure. But, like really looking up to some people that know the literature and know the program. And I don't, but he dug in and helped me get a little bit more acquainted with the literature and the books and the process. And taught me how to approach guys. And so I followed that suggestion and approached a guy who seemed to have a, kind of lukewarm sponsor at the time, and gave him my number and said, I'd be happy to help if you ever just want someone to talk to. And next thing you know, he asked me to be the guy, and I got to be the guy for the first time.
Wow.
And that I can remember that experience just as clearly as I can remember my first drink and my first high, like,
what was that like? Like, what was that like to have somebody ask you?
Oh man. I mean, I was flattered. I was floored. I was intimidated and scared. And he was such a cool character too. I mean, like, big, stocky stature, refrigerator of a guy. I mean, competitive power lifter at one point, but also like off the charts smart, like ended up going to study neuroscience at a high level, like brilliant, and soft-spoken, quiet, but like physically very intimidating. And he was desperate, right? And he was eager, and he was willing to do the work, and he did the work. And I remember distinctly, he had gotten a really good job. He was starting to clean up his past, and he had that kind of, it was almost like an aha moment of his own, where like, he had heard it from me and other people that saw the change in him. But I think he started to be convinced that he was actually getting better, it was after, months of work. But we were sitting in the front seat of my Explorer. I was driving a Ford Explorer at the time. He was in the passenger seat. And I think I was dropping him off for work or hanging out with him while he was on a break for work. Distinctly remember where we were geographically. And he's like, he said something. He's like, man, you saved my life. And I was like, dude, I didn't do shit. I was like, he saved your life. And I was like, as soon as I did that, I was like, where did the whole thing just came together? And I was like, dude, this is so wild. This is so far outside my realm of understanding and logic, that like he said that to me and I responded the way that I did. And it was powerful, right? Like, he was probably in tears. I was probably in tears, or at least, overwhelmed with emotion as to how special that moment really was. And I was hooked, man. I like, the Kool-Aid had never been tastier in that moment. Right. So I went on a rampage, and was ready to save everybody at that point,
And did you? Where did it go from there?
No. I mean, I definitely, I took that experience and, and definitely went on a campaign, right, to sponsor as many guys as I could, but I also, it wasn't long before, I became distracted with relationships, and, the young people's, like sub fellowship, if you want to call it, became really attractive, and like service work within that was also a really big component of that period of sobriety for me. Which included, popularity and like, gaining a network that was far outside of our immediate geographic network, and, parties and events and conferences, and, juggling, raising a child, every other weekend. Cause, Brody's starting to grow up at this point, so we're having some fun, and it, I'm kind of showing off a little bit, cause now I'm a present father and active, involved in his life, and we're doing some cool stuff. But probably ill motives behind some of that, just looking to get validation that I hadn't gotten in previous chapters. But I mean, I think I carried 2, 3, 4, 5 sponsees at different points throughout the next 4 or 5 years, and that ended up being a full 6, 7 year period of pretty active work in the program, service work, and making a life for myself too. I got out of the hospitality industry, I got into real estate, and that proved to be pretty successful there for a few years. Was able to create a cool life for myself, got out of renting these tiny little 1 and 2 bedroom condos, and bought a home, and had some toys, and took some trips, and, provided for my son in a pretty good way. But I think that also led to ultimately the demise, which looked like resetting the clock again. But it was, for all intents and purposes, it was a pretty cool run there for 8 years of sobriety in my late 20s and early 30s.
So you mentioned the demise. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the time leading up to that. Like, what did it, the still sober time, and then obviously the picking up time?
Yeah, I mean, leading up to year 8, I mean, it was, we hosted a really big conference in Orlando. That was a big culmination of a lot of years of work, and was pretty burnt out with that thing, experience, which a lot of people go through similar experiences, but that led to a pretty deliberate separation, at least from that that group, that sub fellowship, if you will. Plus, my material success, I think, fueled some pretty big ego. I'd been given opportunity to speak in front of some decent sized crowds, and I remember talking more about how like I was probably like a hopeful agnostic, and therapy was really great, which was all very true, but it wasn't a great message of recovery, and there was a lot of pride, a lot of taking credit for the things that I had accomplished and the successes that I had. Another bad breakup as a result of trying to, align with partners that were just ultimately unequally yoked, and feeling as if I came out ahead from that. I'd seen a couple people close to me that seemed to be drinking successfully, and that started to look attractive. So that last year was probably my exit. I like this theory that I worked the steps backwards, right? Probably disengaged with anybody that was still calling me their sponsor at the time. Started finding fault at every meeting that I was going to, or the people at the meetings that I was going to. Far more interested in this just awful idea that I needed to continue building my life outside of recovery meetings. And I feel like at one point I saw or read or learned that biologically, on a cellular level, our entire bodies are regenerated every 8 years. And I'm coming up to 8 years sober. I'm like, well, perfect time, right? 8 years sober. I don't no longer have the same proclivities. And so within a couple of months of getting 8 years, I went on a Bumble date, and she had some cocktails and I had some cocktails with her. Right back at it.
You ever hear that? And I forget who says it, but it's somebody. Maybe it was Steve or one of the guys. He says, I've got 2 brain cells. One's selling me bullshit, and the other one's buying it. And that 8 years of your body regenerating, man, that's a bumper sticker right there.
Yeah.
I drank over that. That's hilarious.
Backed by science. Yep.
Yeah. No. I mean, hey, you could make the argument. And so, Bumble date. I met my wife on Bumble. Bumble dates were nice.
I know, that's the only reason I haven't deleted it yet.
So you pick up. How old are you at this point?
I was 34 years old.
Okay. And so where do you go at this point, right? And it's interesting, the mindset that, before you answer that, the mindset that you kind of allude to, in that when we get to that point of restless, irritable, and discontented again in sobriety, and our brains offer us up this absurd reason for, maybe I can try it again. Oh, did I lose you? Nope, you're there. This insane reason for maybe I could try it again, and we believe it almost without a shadow of a doubt. Like, it's crazy the way that works. And so, all right, you pick up. What does this run look like?
That one didn't last long. That would have been somewhere around the holiday time, 2020. Within a few months, I mean, I think COVID had set in at this point, right? So like the world was getting weird, and it may have been, leading up to that may have contributed to my justification for going out again, right? Because meetings were getting weird, and added to my disinterest to it. But my father got sick in March of 2021, and he ended up dying of COVID within about 10 days of getting sick. March or April? I think April. He got sick late March, past early April. And the bottom really fell out for me after that. I mean, I had a good reason to anesthetize and, be mad at God, the world, you name it. Drank and used to escape, right? I didn't want to feel what I was feeling at the time. It was by design. And that became really, really scary, really ugly. And so I think I lasted through the summertime of 2021 before I wandered back in with tail between my legs after like 6 months, and dad passing. And, but even that, that would have been summertime of 21. And then I lost my hearing in November of 21. And that was my next excuse to be mad at the world and God, because that there was no real solution for that after a few months of seeing doctors. So I went back out again and absolutely.
Can we dig into that a little?
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
So what happened? So, all right, you stopped drinking after the summer, and then November comes around, and I've heard you tell me the story, in the past, but I'm curious if you could explain it to the people listening.
Sure. November 4th, 2021, day that I'll never forget. Right. I mean, I woke up early, way earlier than I needed to be awake for. And, felt like I had swimmer's ear, right? Like my ear was clogged or full, but couldn't seem to shake it up or loosen it up or clean out whatever earwax may have been in there. So, started to get a little bit concerned, as the day was getting started. And Google said, yeah, treat it like a medical emergency, go see a doctor if you can. So I got my son off to school, got a doctor's appointment for that afternoon, went and got every over-the-counter earwax removal kit I could get my hands on, and spent hours thinking it might just be earwax. And the doctor went and looked inside my ear with, the otoscope, and was like, yeah, no, that's one of the cleanest ear canals I've ever seen. And he went through a hearing test, and it was bad. It was real bad. So they prescribed steroids, oral steroids, prednisone, for a couple weeks, and hopefully it would improve. It did not. Switch from oral steroids to intramuscular steroids for a couple of weeks, hoping it would improve. It did not. And after that, they said, well, we got one less shot to try, and that's shots of steroids directly into your eardrum. But I don't know that that's a good idea, because your hearing hasn't gotten any better since then, since it happened. So we opted not to do that. Started going through a process to get approval from insurance to get a cochlear implant. Come to find out, I didn't have the right insurance company to approve that single-sided cochlear implant procedure, because they didn't feel it was medically necessary. So the doctors basically said, not much we can do for you, but come open enrollment next year, come back with like a Blue Cross plan. And in the meantime, just distract your brain from the constant ringing. That's all I could hear at that point. Fortunately, some of the other side effects had gone away. There were some balance issues at first, some vertigo, but the ringing was 24/7 in my deaf ear, right? And that was maddening. And the doctor said, just distract yourself from that. And I was like, well, I know how to do that. So I went back to chemicals and figured I would just ride it till the wheels fell off, or some miraculous change of policy or medical breakthrough, or you name it. Learned what it would cost to pay out of pocket. Didn't have that much in the bank, but I had some assets. So I sold the house, sold as many toys as I was willing to part with, moved from Orlando to Sanford, because downtown Sanford looked like a lot of fun. And as a result of the move, I was able to change insurance companies earlier than open enrollment, because I was still self-employed as a full-time real estate agent at the time. But I dug in and found an insurance company that I could get a policy through the marketplace that would allow and approve the procedure. So about a year later, I managed to get seen by the right doctor, who got the approval from the insurance company that I had just gotten, and had a surgery date scheduled for the summer of 2023, and went down to South Florida and became Bionic Man.
Yeah. So you were drinking this whole time, like November, December of 21 until 20?
Pretty much.
Early 24? Late 24?
Yeah, I remember I wandered into a couple of meetings during the time that I was living in Sanford, but it wasn't the quality of life that I had was slim. I mean, with the tinnitus when I was sober was pretty unbearable. The tinnitus while drinking and using and partying and socializing, that was a very viable distraction for the literal sound in my head.
Mm.
I was willing to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation as best I could, because what I had physiologically was intolerable. But then I got the procedure. I went back a month later. They turned it on. The ringing went away, and then I celebrated for a couple of months, and then showed back up in December of 23.
Wow.
And yeah.
What was the catalyst to bring you back in?
I think once they activated the device in my head that caused the ringing to stop, there felt like there was a real quality of life worth preserving, and whatever additional convincing came as a natural byproduct of that, period of anesthetizing deliberately, was sufficient. I mean, I had several other, near misses with law enforcement, car accident, hospitalization, all during that what would have been 2-year period, so 2.5-year period. So it was, there was little to no doubt in my mind that I needed to be done. Brody was, gosh, he would have been 15 at the time, 14 years old, my son, 14, obviously super impressionable. Somehow managed to avoid any real consequences for him. He would tell you he's never seen me drink, because he didn't know I was drinking the couple of times that I did with him around. But knew that I was flirting with some pretty severe consequences that could start having adverse effects on him and other people that were fond of me. So quality of life had been restored. It took a couple of months, I think, for me to really come to terms with that and get over the pride of coming back, again. Sure. You know what I mean?
Well, and I'm curious about that as somebody who has, lived most of their adult life in and then out of a 12-step fellowship. What was it like coming back, this last time? What did you find to be one of the most difficult things?
I mean, anything that I think was perceived to be difficult was only actually difficult in my head before I actually followed through with it. It was fear-based difficulties for sure. I think once I finally did show up again to the places that I didn't want to go to, I was met with open arms and encouragement. I mean, it was humility is, it's a tough pill to swallow, but I think it was the appropriate theme, and largely still is, for me, the appropriate theme or focal point of my sobriety now is humility, and really accepting true defeat, that this thing will always win if I don't do a few things that I was taught to do a long time ago, just never put into practice with any real discipline. And keeping humility as the focal point, I think has helped keep me right size. A couple of, and again, near-death experiences, and recognizing that while my quality of life, even with the cochlear implant, is still significantly compromised, it's far better than the alternative, being sober for sure, and I've leaned into that, I mean, you've had a front row seat to what the past few years of my life has looked like with hearing loss in sobriety. I've managed to lean into that. It's become a really special silver lining for what life looks like today, but yeah, I was pretty scared to death there for a little bit. Prior to getting sober again, I was willing to see my son through high school, right? I figured once he graduated high school, I would exhaust whatever resources I had left to go, see what the bitter end actually looked like, if I could speed it up, because
right.
I miss dad too. I was, a little more interested to see what dad was experiencing on the other side of
Sure.
a human experience, So
One of the things that I struggled with, because I'm a frequent retread, even more times than I can count probably at this point. But one of the
sure.
things that I struggled with, having been in 12-step recovery for most of my adult life, was having some knowledge from a prior experience, but then not allowing myself to have a new experience, because what I was doing was I was framing up my current experience through the eyes of what I had experienced before. Wow. I think
Sure.
I just made myself confused, but I think you understand what I'm saying, right?
Inception.
Like, yeah, just like let it be new, like allow myself to be a newcomer, not be the guy that's like, hey, I'm new, I got 2 months, but I had 7 years, or hey, you know what I mean? That kind of guy. Yeah. And I'm curious if you went through any of that coming back.
Oh, 100%. Right. But I remember getting some neat insight from some people. I can't remember specifically who or what the context was, but they pointed out that like the collective experience in sobriety is not wasted, is not gone. Like you managed to, there were certain things that you learned to do successfully or effectively for significant periods of time, and so even though like in the early days, raising my hand as a newcomer or picking up, all the chips leading up to the year, I think in the back of my head, and I maybe even articulated a couple of times that like when somebody asks how much time you have, it's like, well, consecutively, I've got this, collectively, I've got this, because like, and I feel like there's value to that, and when it comes down to like the experience part, like the experience has been wildly different, right? The knowledge piece is absolutely worth retaining because, the literature hasn't changed. The suggestions within the literature haven't changed. Sure, there might be some new tactics to implore or deploy rather, but it's all surrounding the same thing at the core. All of it's still the same, So I feel profoundly fortunate that I had the sponsor that I had for the first year and a half. We were sponsee brothers there for a bit. And he gave me some ideas and some suggestions and things that I had never heard of before. And I got to work on all of them, like immediately. And I took it competitively, like similarly how he refers to his experience being new. I remember thinking to myself, man, this guy sponsors a bunch of guys. I'm going to be MVP of the year, rookie of the year, sponsee of the year, you name it, and you and I were in competition at one point. You didn't even know it, but just from that approach, but like I knew that I needed to have a new experience. I knew that I needed to have a different experience that was sustainable and not that glamorous. You know what I mean? Because I'd had a glamorous experience before, at least what I thought, or if this experience, if and maybe when it does become glamorous, that I don't take any credit for it. You know what I mean? Because like largely, I don't deserve another shot at this thing. How many lives does one get to really have when it talks about when we really are dancing with the devil? So I mean, the experience has been profoundly different. Even though the knowledge piece or the approach to what we know to be true about, the literature, the program, the actions to be taken, it's grown without a doubt. It's absolutely grown and evolved. And it's still, still very humbling to talk about this stuff, because I have a buddy that I was in treatment with 20 some odd years ago, who is only a couple months older than me, and he hasn't changed his sobriety date, right? Like he's 40 years old with 21 years sober.
That's wild.
Yeah, man. And we're yeah, dude, crushing life. And he and I are still in touch. His family and my family are still pretty deeply intertwined. I still call his mom my mom. I could call up right now and ask for a home cooked meal, and she'd ask me what time I'm showing up. So that those experiences run pretty deep, and it's humbling to talk about, but it's a great reminder of what's out there waiting for me if it seems like a good idea at any given point, which it hasn't, it really hasn't in the past few years. So.
Along those lines, I want to ask you a question. I mean, one thing, anytime I can recollect having a very fulfilling experience in sobriety, I've always been surrounded by deep connections with other people. Like I can look out and I can go, okay, here are all the people that are in my circle and they know me and I know them. Right. And it's that thing that, I never really got anywhere else. And I'm curious if that's been, a part of your experience as well.
For the last few years, without a doubt, you know what I mean? The experience that I've had over the past few years looks nothing like the collective 11 years or so that I've had prior to this, primarily men's meetings and an H&I commitment, leaning into those connections with other men that are walking a similar path, the iron sharpens iron, God speaking to us through 90-degree angles, learning how to get past or learn to get comfortable in the uncomfortable, with being transparent and honest about what's going on in my life, despite the fear of judgment, which has never been the reality, right? It's all in my head. And at any point in time that I'm feeling lonely, all I got to do is open the messages on my phone and see that there's a handful of guys in there that I know everything about what's going on in their life. And at any given point, they're happy to hear about everything going on in my life. And, I've done better in the past. I can afford to do better in that arena here and now, with just keeping current. But, I would say to my defense, when I get current, I get current, I don't hold back, I'll get you up to speed with what's really going on without beating around the bush. My current sponsor knows everything going on in my life. That whole experience has been wild. Meeting the guy, Paul, the guy that I've got now, who has the same kind of hearing loss that I do, as a byproduct of Hunter and, the retreats and all that stuff, just none of this, what I've got now, none of this looked attractive 5-10 years ago. I was all about doing young people stuff and throwing parties and going to conferences, where we're throwing parties and staying up late and hooking up. And now it's like, not interested, I can't wait to go hang out with a bunch of dudes and talk about our feelings, like what?
It's a lot to be said for growing up. I mean, there really is. And I'm curious, and maybe we can conclude with this question.
Sure.
I'm always surprised, and I watch a lot of recovery podcasts, and I'm surprised at how many comments come in from people who are, they have tried sobriety, they couldn't get the sobriety angle, or it didn't seem to click. And I'm curious what you would say to somebody who feels like they've tried sobriety and they've tried the 12-step recovery angle, and they would say something like, well, it just didn't work for me. And I know you've heard people say that before. I know I've heard a lot of people say that before. Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody like that?
Oh man, I don't know. I'd try and pick it apart. Like, did you really try? Did you try 12 out of 12? Were you actively reaching out to people that are dying from this thing? Are you the real deal? That might not be the best approach to it, but arguably plenty of people show up here that may not have exactly what we have. They just had a bad run at it. And so arguably they may not have the same experience going through the process of recovery that we've known to be effective. But I would say, have you really tried? Have you exhausted all possible options within that? Have you tried every meeting within a 30-minute drive from where you live? Right? Are there other meetings to try? Is it the people, or is it the actual process? Because if it's the people, then no, you haven't tried. Right? People are fallible. We're all going to disappoint you at some point. The program and their introduction to a power greater than ourselves that is perfect and infallible will never fail. The track record speaks for itself. Not just me, but anybody and everybody I know that practices this thing on a daily basis. So try again, try harder, try different. Something like that. If you've got this thing and you're scared to death of it, let's find something that you haven't tried yet, because there's a version of this that'll work for you. It might look a little different than the one you've tried, but there's another version. might just look like a slightly different group of people, or the Buddhist approach, or the Celebrate Recovery approach, or, you know, whatever, or a blank A that we just haven't tried, you know, like maybe their meetings are way more appropriate for your cup of tea. Let's go try them all. I'm down. I'll go with you. You know, I want to experience it all. Drum circles, crystals, you know, essentialists. Let's do all of it. You know, let's see what works, because there's options you haven't tried yet. I almost guarantee you. If you're convinced it's not working, then there are options you haven't explored yet.
Beautiful. Jordan, thank you so much for being here, my friend. Always a pleasure to see you. I love you.
Thank you, sir. Love you too, buddy.
Today, man. And that is it. Yeah, dude. For anyone listening in, thanks for tuning in. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Take care.